Mhm. All right. So, unfortunately, Nate's seen this presentation already, so there are not going to be too many beats he hasn't seen, but nobody else here has, so this will be amazing. All right. So this presentation is titled Shaping Identity, Storytelling, and Visual Design, and basically goes over some of the motifs in my book, Design Against Racism. One of the first things that I wanted to talk to you guys about today was design as a system of power. Whenever I say that, I always like to ask, just as a basis for the conversation, what does that mean to you guys?
To me, it acknowledges how much of the world has been designed,
Mm-hmm.
and so the designers of the built world have a lot of power,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all like being impacted by other people who design this design.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No worries.
This is kind of going to be a little round robin because the online audience would like to hear everyone's conversation. So apologies if I am running around giving you the microphone.
Oh, no worries.
That's all good.
Yeah, and to add to Mordecai's point, I also think it's like there are the people who are the designers and kind of like the tastemakers, and those rules and standards are become the laws that we all have to live and create by, which isn't always appropriate based on our own experience. So,
No, that's perfect. So when we think of design, I like to define design as anything that is artificial, that augments, curates, or amplifies human existence. And those amplifications can come in a number of different ways. It can influence how we tell stories. So if we think about this piece from Greece, that was utilized to pass stories of mythology, religious worship. If we think about augmented or curated human existence, right? So when we think about design as a tool of power, as John mentioned, design are artificial systems and belief systems that support those constructions that dictate how we behave in the world today, right? Design to your day-to-day engagement, right? Thanksgiving was a holiday that just passed by. How many of you guys, by show of hands, celebrate Thanksgiving? All right. Now think about the shape of your table. Think about the utensils that you use. Think about the cutlery that you use for whatever dish that you made. Think about how you pass one meal to the next. Think about who sits in what chair. Think about who gets served first. Think about why particular dishes are there and not there. And then think about how that observation and those small things will change from one home to another. Who's in charge of making those decisions and why those decisions made, right? Do we serve the elders in the family first because of reverence for the elders? Do we give it to the children because we place greater emphasis on new life versus the elders that have been here? Do we disregard our elders and just give it, free for all? You get the food whenever you get the food. How do we sit at tables? Is there a rectangular or square-based format where there's a head to the table? Is there a triangle where three people can sit and have their own points? Or is there a circle where there are no heads? How does that influence the family hierarchy that's there? And that may sound simple, but these are small design choices that then impact how we engage with each other on a day-to-day basis. Those design choices, even as far as a Thanksgiving meal, helps dictate and influence the hierarchical system of the house. You now have design artifacts that supplement and support hierarchical decisions and belief systems, moral belief systems that the family actually adheres to. One of the things with that, I like to transition to the idea that a lot of design schools teach, which, again, I curse, so I apologize if it offends anybody, but I think is bullshit, which is the adage that design does no harm. And I tell people consistently, both my students, colleagues, and faculty members, that It's not that design does no harm, it's that we don't teach students how to measure the harm that design actually creates. And there are multiple examples of how design has created harm, but because we don't talk about it, it often gets ignored. So, for example, I'm going to ask a question, and it's kind of like a pop quiz question, and you don't have to be worried because the answer is right behind me. But whenever you think, or it's implied behind me, whenever you think about car accidents, what demographic do you think gets harmed the most in a car crash? And before anybody makes an assumption, this isn't based off of stereotypes of driving ability or anything of that nature. It's just strictly around car crashes. What demographic do you guys feel gets harmed the most?
Women.
Why?
There's no research that's done really like including like their body types and structures for like crash dummy tests. So when accidents happen, like all the safety measures we essentially have in vehicles are prioritized men, right? Like everything, seatbelt design, airbags, like literally everything. So when you don't fit that and you're involved in a car accident, the system that's there isn't meant to really protect you,
Yeah.
so you're gonna end up hurt more.
Exactly. So they're now attempting to switch that now, but think about that from the standpoint of what happens during car crashes, right? So if women are harmed more because their anatomical structure isn't necessarily considered in the same way that men's happen to be, that means more time in the hospital, longer recovery windows, longer time off from work, maybe a larger amount of pay that's lost, especially considering that women also aren't paid at the same rate that men are paid. And also, in addition to that, higher fatality rates. If they do survive, potentially higher insurance, well, I can't make that assumption based off the crash test dummies, but all of those other pieces are things that we can safely assume. So if we now realize that, hey, you've now designed this vehicle to be the safest for a 5'11" male who's 171 pounds, anyone who falls out of that category is less safe. So I'm a male. I'm an inch shorter than 5'11". I'm not 171 pounds. I'm 195 right now. So I'm an inch shorter than that, taller than that, heavier than that, or lighter than that. They are less safe because the dummy that's being leveraged isn't built like me. Does that make sense? All right. Another one. How many people in this room have gone to a bathroom at any type of venue and the automatic faucet does not recognize your skin tone? Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it'll recognize it. Yeah. Yeah. So it struggles to recognize, the light sensor in the machine struggles to communicate to the sensor when bouncing off of darker skin tones. But again, why do we wash our hands? Is it not to promote safety, to prevent the passages of germs and other types of diseases? So if brown-skinned people are less able to wash their hands and practice these particular things, is that not another example of a design flaw in a system that could create additional harm? Or women using the bathroom at major sporting events and concerts, right? One of my favorite exercises that I talk about in the book, I'll often ask my students to work in a silo and do a journey map for me to describe how many steps it takes for them to use the bathroom at a concert or sporting event. And I give the caveat, I'm not asking what you do once you're using the bathroom, but how many steps does it take for you to use the bathroom and get back, right? How many steps would you assume that men take?
200.
No. Way under, but that's a good guess. Yeah.
No idea.
Anybody else? So Nate's cheating because he heard it already. So like for men,
Like at a cab stand? Like you have to go up out of your seat, like around,
yeah. I mean, it's usually out of my seat, find the bathroom, choose a urinal or a stall, wash my hands. If they remember to do that, then walk back to my seat. Right? 5. How many would you assume for women?
Oh, I thought you meant actual, like physical, like I'm counting myself.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Like process. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
For women, how many would you assume?
At least 7.
I normally,
Would it be like double?
it depends. So whenever I do this exercise, I find the women in the room often rotate between 8 to 34 steps, sometimes more.
Depends on what you're wearing.
Yeah. So it's like I get up, I find the line to the bathroom, so it's not a direct entrance into the bathroom. Then once I find the line to the bathroom, I then need to choose a stall. The stall has to be big enough for me to hang my purse. I need to then maneuver my outfit depending on the complexity of the outfit in order to use the bathroom. There's also different steps depending on whether or not the woman's on her cycle, with child, lactating, or anything of that nature. Then it's how do I return my outfit to the integrity that it was before I got into the stall, get into the line to wash my hands, and like several additional steps before she can then get back to her seat. Which
More considering children.
exactly. And I do this exercise in the classroom to then showcase to the men in the room that, well, to the men and the women, that we all fall into the category of in-groups and out-groups. And whenever we're a part of an in-group, we're not necessarily as familiar with the experiences that the out-groups have. But if the in-groupers are designing from their own perspectives, you end up in situations where the line for women using the bathroom looks like this, because the people that are designing it aren't taking full account into the nuances of their experience, even though they're leveraging design artifacts that are being created by the in-group. So I would then ask the men in the room to raise their hand. Men in the room, raise your hands, please. All right, and only drop your hand when I say something you do not agree with. Prior to Omari sharing with me the 8 to 34 steps that women go through, I feel that I personally would have been able to equitably design a bathroom experience for women.
You just drop my hand and you say what?
Say something you do not agree with. So you guys feel like you would have been able to equitably design a bathroom experience for women prior? Yeah.
I feel like that's a trick question. Like I'm a
It
designer.
is a trick question.
I'm a designer, and so I feel like it's also like you include those people in what you're building, right? But I think it really depends on your approach. If you're including the women, you're like co-designing with them, you can equitably, hopefully, build a space,
The
right?
question wasn't about co-designing. It was like,
Oh, snap! He got me.
all right, how many of you feel that prior to me talking about those 8 to 34 steps, feel that you would have been able to design an equitable bathroom experience for other women? All right, now gentlemen, look at their hands, they're elevated. So what if I told you that the woman you were designing for is trans, or disabled, or comes from a part of the world where the flushing mechanism on the toilet is different? Do you still feel that you would be able to?
Yeah, but I've worked with the disabled for 10 years, and a lot of what we did was looking at how they use different spaces, and how can we teach them to successfully use those spaces if they're visually impaired, physically impaired or whatever. That's something I've worked with, so sometimes it's based on experiences.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
The thing that I want you guys to realize is when I asked the men to think about the women, all of their hands dropped down. When I asked the women, they were fully confident that they could design for themselves. But as soon as you change some of the intersectionalities of the identity they're designing for, there's less confidence in your ability to do it. So it showcases that even though we occupy a society where there's in-groups and out-groups, we still internally have in-group and out-group identities, right? Now that may sound silly. I'm a black male, positions men a particular way, my gender falls within a particular in-group, but my out-group has unique experiences that other men who don't have the same out-group experience might not understand. But for designers, it's really important to articulate that when you are designing for someone, one, you are designing from an intersectional perspective, and two, you are designing for people with intersectional perspectives. And if you don't account for the nuances of those identities, you can then create something that could be harmful for the people that are engaging with that space.
Can I take a step back 1 minute? I want to go back to that tab, this. And I'm looking at the topic of your book, Creating Work That Transforms Communities and Design Against Racism. This is something I experienced working in Garden Valley. My children there never turned the water off because they weren't accustomed to this. They never flushed the toilet because their experiences weren't built on something where your motion, your designs like this. But if you've not had that experience, if your schools are still schools where you have to turn a faucet, or flush a toilet, and that's not what you do when you go into another situation, then how much are you transforming these communities to be able to make a difference in their lives? You know, we see that a lot, that a lot of design, it may, and when we talk about design, and you raised that question earlier, some of it I think is intentional. You know, it's designed that way intentionally, and it's not designed that way as a positive intentional. You know what I'm saying? It has, it sometimes it's to keep certain groups in the dark, are not responsive as they could be.
Designing in spite of instead of designing for.
Yes.
We're intentionally not going to include, we're not going to prioritize including these demographics into our case studies because we don't necessarily evaluate them in the same way. But I often communicate both to clients that I work with as well as my students, you can begin the process of advocating for particular groups due to the fact that it lowers the liability for the company that you were designing for. But I'll also ask my students, like, hey, how many of you guys use text messaging? Or how many of you guys have listened to an audiobook? To which they'll all raise their hand, and I'd be like, you realize that those are designed for disabled populations, and they're more commonly used ubiquitously by able-bodied people than they are for disabled populations. So if you now design things for people that fall into outgroups, while yes, some people might call it woke rhetoric in the current however they classify it, it's still something that serves the greater good of society, and it's still something that impacts not just the people that are in need, but it impacts the day-to-day person. Restorative design is a practice that centers healing, equity, and inclusivity by acknowledging past harms, repairing them, and creating futures shaped by the voices and needs of marginalized communities, right? I think when we think of marginalized identities, we often strictly tie them to race, but again, we all have in-group and out-group identities. I grew up poor. That was an out-group identity. I know people that have grown up in rural communities. That's also an out-group identity. I know people that are extremely educated, which place you as an out-group. And how they engage with different things showcases that. So Nate's done this exercise. I'll have you ring, 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 ring. And y'all let it ring a whole lot before I pick up. All right.
Would be a little bit longer.
Yeah, clarifying, like, is it FaceTime?
Oh, no, it's just a phone call. All right, so ring, ring. How do you guys pick up the phone? Just with your hands, no actual phones. Because if you did this, that means that you grew up in a house with a landline that had a mic and a receiver for you to speak into. If you did this or this, then you're actually using the symbolism that, you know, the current generations are using because they own, or I'm designing something for a current phone. And my grandmother was born in the 30s, right? My grandmother, if I asked her to think about her exposure to technology, the current cell phones that we have in our pockets today are more powerful than the initial computer that was retailed in the 1970s for public consumption. And by the 70s, my grandmother was like, by the time that computer came out, my grandmother was inching closer to her 50s. So she was already fully grown and on understanding of how to design for and how to navigate. And think about it from other standpoints. Some people live in rural communities where the infrastructure for Wi-Fi has not been established, so their cell phone is their own they're used to. How are they going to leverage those systems? And does it not put them at a disservice?
That's so true. She had like a more stuff.
She
Like,
probably
I
still
don't
use
know,
that
but
menu
then
button.
she's
I miss that one myself. I ain't gonna front. Just look it up again on my nerve.
There's like a cost, right? Like,
yeah.
as far as like the frustration level versus like, the perceived value of what that product offers. There's more limits on it.
Yeah. I knew a faculty member who brought us a floppy disk to class, and one of the students was like, why'd you 3D print a save icon off the, like, they didn't realize that it was a part of, like,
And the in-group and out-group there, like,
Yeah.
I have a Samsung.
yeah.
So like the iPhone, like the iPhone, I'm out.
And the work that she did as an anthropologist, most people only know Zora Neale blowing up during the Harlem Renaissance for that stuff. She was an anthropologist. Tough today isn't old school tough, right? So when we think of tough, we may think of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, 50 Cent, like all of these action stars and the movies that they do, the bravado that people display in music that they have nowadays, cowboys, westerns. Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropology student at a time period that predates women having the right to vote. Towns were a lot more prominent, and you being caught in that sundown town, 1920s would be curtains for you. And she would still drive from Harlem, New York, into the Deep South to document these folklore stories by herself, gun in her lap. That's tough. That's tough. I'm not gonna lie to you. I drive through Ohio sometimes, and the bigger the Trump signs get, the more uncomfortable I get. So the fact that she was willing to do that when the entire country was a bit more extreme than even our current presidential administrator, and then she was just like, I got this revolver in my lap, they want me, come get me. Actually, we're so progressive at that time. So the gentleman behind me is Kasula, or Cudjo Lewis, which was his slave name. That book got published decades after she died. And it was because of those practices. So things such as, like, you were named Cudjo Lewis after you were captured, but his given name was Kasula. So calling someone by their given name. What was his big thing? Say my name, right? When he decided to change his name from Cassius Clay, simply saying, call me by the pronouns of my choice. But she chose to identify this person by the way that they wanted to be identified, which was extremely progressive. Another thing, said something and you've made a valid point, but the immediate response to you is actually there, not there. Where grammar becomes this tool to police what you're saying, but also diminish the point that you're making. Like, it can't be that real if you're utilizing a punctuation mark. Wanting you to decipher what he meant by it. And there were a number of other things, but it shared the power between the person that was speaking and the person that was interviewing, rather than attributing, well, he said it this way, but this is proper English, or this is how it's supposed to be said, which, again, pulls power away from the person that you're interviewing. That information that you may have on marginalized groups might not come from those marginalized groups. It might be, academic studies that were done and written by people that don't belong to those outgroups, and observations of those outgroups, which could be a misunderstanding. So just like we talked about Thanksgiving dinner and how you guys set up, let's say you invite me to your Thanksgiving celebration, right? And let's say I don't have much of an engagement with your family outside of me coming to Thanksgiving of your Thanksgiving dinner. And anything could have been happening, Uncle John may have found out that little Jimmy's not his. Grandma might be dealing with dementia. There might be concerns around when the next bill is going to be paid. Cousin Joe might be pissed off that other cousin didn't chip in the same amount of money on the food. There might be some tensions there, and I don't know the dynamics of that. I'm just there observing. So I could leave, and I'm like, oh, well, this family is filled with sexual philanderers who are financially irresponsible. The children are all illegitimate, and their ability to share in community is it's not there, right? So it becomes a superficial observation where a lengthy paper is written, and now anybody else who now goes and tries to engage with your family is determining their perspective based off of the paper that I wrote, right? It doesn't give them the ability to tell their story or add contextual information. It's all superficial observations that are now shared, right? Instead, sometimes what's necessary is finding other ways to learn and leverage how that community is articulating itself and then using that as the basis to now ask questions for investigation. So there was a major box retailer that hired me to help them with their Black History Month approaches. And the question that they asked me was, how is Black identity, and you saw this when I presented it in LA. Actually, you and Nate both saw this presentation. But the question became, how do Black people understand and articulate Black expressions authentically? And what can we do to leverage some of those expressions to make more inclusive perspectives? And I thought about it for a little bit. And they were like, we want you to do interviews and like all this other stuff. And I was like, no, I don't think I want to do that. And it's not because I didn't want to speak to Black people, but it's more so along the lines of sometimes even those questions are unfair, right? Like, I'm Omari. I have only been Omari. But if you ask me, what does it feel like to be Omari? I'm going to be like, I don't know. Like, I'm here. It's almost like asking a fish, what does it feel like to swim in water or to breathe through water? It's nothing I've had to think about because it's my existence. But if you find ways to quantify or to qualify how that expression is made, you now have basis for conversation. So the thing that I told them, instead of doing interviews, I was going to look at music albums. And I told them that I was going to go through the last 40 years worth of albums, as many albums as I probably could, within a month's time period. And those albums would stretch across these generations: the Great Gen, Baby Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Generation Z, and Gen Alpha, right? I ended up going through 4,120 albums and broke them down into 4 decades, and then began creating this palette for them, which showcased the most prominent colors that were used in each of these albums. So this is the 1980s, and this kind of showcases how I got these colors. So there's a Prince album, a Janet Jackson album, an album by the Temptations. I think there's a Tevin Campbell album somewhere in here. Followed by another Janet Jackson album. I think that's a New Edition. I'm not sure who these brothers are with the flat top, but I know that's Milli and Vanilli, Otis Redding, EPMD, so forth and so forth. But these are all albums from the 80s, and it wasn't enough to simply find the most prominent colors from these albums, but I needed to find these colors leveraged in real life experiences. So I needed to find actual Black people using these colors in their expressions during these same decades. So, of course, Janet Jackson, LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Prince, Salt and Pepper, Run DMC, and MC Hammer, leveraging these colors. Also, just regular people wearing streetwear clothing, a few ads, and Big Daddy Kane in the far right corner. The 1990s, same thing. You notice that the colors are somewhat similar, but the tonality of each tone might be a little bit different. But same thing, Isaac Hayes, Ice Cube, LL Cool J, NWA, another Temptations album, so forth and so forth. And then we look at them in lived experiences. Nate told me he has a pair of those MC Hammer pants at the crib. He might pull them out. Run DMC, Biggie Smalls, Boyz II Men, In Living Color, Criss Cross, Will Smith, all using the same colors and lived experiences. But while sharing this with them, I'm then able to say, these albums are important because music was one of the few industries where Black people were allowed to exist with little interference. So they can articulate themselves the way that they wanted to articulate themselves. They could share their stories the way that they wanted to share them. And the album covers and the music videos that came out of these were their way of articulating their identity and their self to larger communities. So if we want to think about it like business to consumers or business to business, they were able to person to world at large, individual to world at large is how they were able to communicate through these colors, fabrics, and things of that nature. So 5 palettes over 4 decades, and these were the colors that were the most prominent in each of those albums. 120 albums, so that I can now start attributing meanings to each of these colors. So this color red is the color that's normally used for love. This color red is normally used for other things. One thing I know Nate's going to find interesting, if it's a gold album, then that means that person is now being conscious. Like it's like, yeah. Like think about Nas's first 3 albums. Like if the album is gold, it's either like a holiday album or it's conscious. Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
Looking at the specific albums,
Mhm.
how did you get the specific like color swatch or tonality here? Like,
So there were a couple of things. There's Adobe Max has a system that pulls out the most prominent colors, but we also had students that assisted us, and they began clustering based off of colors that they saw. So,
which colors repeated kind of like the most of them?
Was it skewed by Cash Money and what you call it? No Limit and
I mean, they had a lot of albums in the early 2000s, but not too much. So the album choices actually were smaller in the 80s, just because hip hop and R&B weren't as big in markets, and then as they became more commercial, they blew up. So by the early 2000s, while No Limit did have a lot of albums, you also have to think they had a lot of albums. Eminem and Aftermath Entertainment had a lot of albums. Gucci had a lot of albums, and all the artists out of Atlanta.
These are just albums, not mixtapes.
These are albums. These are just albums. Yeah. I mean, but there are mixtapes that were albums. So like Funk Master Flex, DJ Clue had mixtapes that they made albums. So those were included. But these were primarily just albums. It's hard to get mixtape covers, but also on top of that, a lot of the mixtape covers didn't have rights released for the artwork that was there. So it's, yeah. So yeah, this is just another breakdown of what those colors look like.
does it factor, and this is my hypothesis, but does it factor into the content of the
Album?
type of rap?
So that's what we're doing now. So by looking at all of the album reviews and what the artists are saying that the album was supposed to represent, it now puts us in a position where we can say, okay, everyone that's used this color was attempting to communicate this. So now if you're using this shade of red, this is what this meant. These were the albums that were used during this decade, and this is what this would mean to this generation of people that are now witnessing it, right? So if you think about like the color red, a lot of times the color red was used to signify a major shift. So think about like Janet Jackson's albums, like Rhythm Nation and some of those older albums. Was it?
Even like Kanye, like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
That was a switch.
Or like DMX.
DMX, It's Dark and Hell is Hot. Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation was black, but the Velvet Rope, which came out afterwards, was red, and it was a completely different sound than what she used prior. Think about Michael Jackson's first solo, Off the Wall, which also had a red background. 50 Cent's 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying, which was like his shift, because he had a prior album that was dropped by Columbia, and it was like a big sonic change, especially because it was his first album after being shot. So the voice was different and all these other things. So in certain instances, red becomes this signifier of difference. So each color meant something, and there was a rationale for it. There might not necessarily be a written rule for why it's there, but that's why you begin to look at the patterns and cluster them in order to find out what they actually mean in a given context.
Do you think designers are conscious of this at the time? Or is it just...
No, I think people made choices. I think so. There's this thing that a lot of universities do now. It's a random tangent. I'm gonna use the Donald Trump weave. It's gonna be a lot more coherent. I promise. It's gonna be a lot more coherent. But universities, a lot of universities won't pave roads without first giving it a year to see what direction students walk in order to go to a given space. So they allow the students to beat up the grass, and the spots that are the most worn to them becomes the steps by which they feel it's most advantageous to use, right? I think in this instance, a lot of designers were just treading the same pathway without laying out an actual road for people to walk on. And I think what I'm trying to do with my research is create the road based off of the path that they've already been walking. Yeah, because there hasn't been a rule book that I've seen that's been like, well, this color red means this to the Black community. In reality, we're not really the topic of study in that way. A lot of design is usually done in spite of and not for, in that regard. Yeah. So it's me just being interested in us and our community, and then trying to put it back out into the world.
There's an alignment of colors and emotion
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Mm-hmm.
So will that research kind of like deny or kind of?
I don't know yet. Yeah. I'm not 100% certain. I don't have all of the albums reviewed yet. And even once I get them, I still have to read like all of the album reviews and the interviews. What is the artist saying? Is the artist saying the same thing that reviewers are saying? Because it's one thing if the artist is saying that this is what I was trying to do, and the person who's reviewing it is like, don't nobody believe that shit. Like, it's like, it's one of those situations. Yeah, it's like, no.
Do you think that what was going on in society at that time
Mm-hmm.
also could have influenced those colors?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
rather than just, so rather than just looking at the albums and doing reviews of the albums, also digging a little bit deeper and looking at the time period,
Mhm.
social,
Mhm.
cultural kinds of things that are happening
Mhm.
at the time those albums are made.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that when you were doing when you were describing the darker colors.
Mm-hmm.
That may have been a time when things may have been a little bit more pessimistic in some ways. And then the freer artists got in being able to interpret their own,
Mm-hmm.
then the colors may have changed. They could have been brighter. I was just wondering how society and what was going on in a community or in society,
Yeah.
whether it's music industry or whatever, could have influenced.
I mean, I think once we have all of the albums, reviews, and interviews, that'll be a little bit more prominent because it'll also be reflected in the material of the music itself. So I'm sure like everything from the 1980s will be extremely politicized because you had the war on drugs, you had the what's that? I mean, in the mid to late 2000s, there's probably a lot more optimism around the election of Barack Obama and the world now being perceived to be a lot more progressive and receptive. Shoot, what would be interesting to me is seeing what things look like in the 2030s because it might look closer to the 1980s. But I think the questions you guys are asking are all valid. It's just gonna make itself more apparent as the research concludes. I just don't want to say anything definite because I don't know yet myself. Yeah.
Even like the technology, even the technology that would have been used to create these albums could define some of the color choices.
That's true.
And things like that, because there's a huge difference between like, cutting things out physically for like old school design, scanning it, remaking it,
Mhm.
versus like me opening like Photoshop or Figma in 2025.
Exactly.
And how long those things took versus like to make an album cover in like 3 minutes.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
How did the big box retailer feel about your research, or what was the end result there?
They were supposed to be using it. I don't know how they used it, but I got paid, so that's all that. Like you asked me to give you the information, I gave you the information, I gave the rationale for the information, and I provided proof to showcase like, oh, I'm not just like making something up, but
Just randomly selecting a color every day.
yeah. No. I even gave them all of the albums. So it's like, if you want all 4,120 albums that I had to screenshot, you can have them as well and run the exercise yourself on your own if you have the time. But when I say that, it sounds like contentious, but it wasn't. It was like, oh my God, this is really amazing. This is more than we thought. And I was just like, well, because as a researcher, you know that you might want to go back in and double check the work that somebody else did. So I often tell my students, never take anything on face value. I can tell you the sky is teal, unless, and you'll believe me unless you look up for yourself. So with most of my clients, I often give them my sources.
Okay, two questions.
Yes.
One, have you thought about, like, well, not thought about, but who actually designed these albums? Like, were they a part of the record companies? Like, were they actually, like, people of color behind the scenes? Or was it just an interpretation of what they saw represented in the culture?
So, yeah. So I haven't necessarily looked into who the designers were. The reality of it, like, there are not a lot of black designers, so the reality of who designed it was not black, but the artist has to sign off before it goes out into the world. So for me, if the artist is saying, this is how I dress, or one thing a colleague of mine pointed out, who's a little bit older than myself, in the 1980s, a lot of rappers, when introducing themselves, would take photos in their neighborhood, on their block. Shoot, even beyond that, you brought up Cash Money Records. Lil Wayne's first album cover was in their neighborhood. A lot of their album covers were shot in Magnolia Projects in New Orleans. But artists were very, especially after like NWA, very much so. Well, I want to say like the 80s was also a very specific choice to start with. How many of you guys have seen The Five Heartbeats, the movie? All right. No?
Nerd.
It's a cult classic. You don't have to.
Okay.
But there's a scene in the movie where like they get their album cover. The movie takes place in like the 50s to the 70s. They get their first album cover. They're looking at it as a group, and it doesn't showcase them. It showcases a white couple on the cover, even though there were a black group. And the reasoning was, well, if we have a white couple on the cover, it'll sell more copies than it would if it was a black couple on the cover. And you saw a lot of that predating the 1980s. But then when NWA came out, and you now have a rap group that's literally titling themselves Niggas with Attitudes. Single is Fuck the Police. It's like it became like this shattering glass where people are like, oh, if they can say that, then they can say anything. So I can put myself on the cover and I can showcase myself the way that I want to. So predating the 80s and even into the 80s, depending on the type of music that was being produced, like the Temptations are black, but their representation of identity will be a lot more respectable and conservative than other people from other music genres that are pushing against that perspective. It's very similar to when soldiers returned back from the world wars, and then the sexual revolution started, where people were like, fuck this repression, this respectability, like politics, I'm getting some. And I don't care what you guys think about that. I just put my life on the line for my country. I'm taking advantage of the fruits of life. And I feel like for a lot of people, it wasn't necessarily fighting in a world war, but it was, I watched my parents live under this repression. They watched their parents live under this repression. I now see my opportunity to kick the door open and express myself the way that I want to. So that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. So really quickly, my family's from Jamaica, if you guys ever heard me say that before. And for us, when this happened behind us, it was like a huge thing, right? When Usain Bolt won his first gold medal at the Olympics and then ran the track holding the Jamaican flag, we all felt like we won, right? I was out in the streets sprinting people, losing, but I was, no. I was like, Usain got that gold. I'm about to dust you. It's in the genetics. It wasn't, but still, this felt like it was representing me, right? This felt like it was a huge deal, and for a lot of people, not a lot of people, what people don't realize about flags is that in the way that these albums articulated identity from person to community, flags are how countries articulate sovereignty and identity to their people and to the world at large, right? So the album covers were individual, person to person, person to community. Flags are nation to citizen, nation to globe. right? And you'll find similar motifs in certain flags that share similar regions. So the Scandinavian countries will have the cross. Countries in the Arab League will have similar motifs, as well as Slavic nations will have similar motifs. They showcase a shared history and lineage, right? So in this detail, well, I can make mention of this afterwards. Not really. Yeah. So as a part of the study, I also said to them, like, I looked at the album covers to understand person to community, person to person expressions, but the flags will actually showcase nation to citizen, nation to globe, in case that you guys were interested in more of a international perspective and not just American Black. And we looked at 54 flags from Africa, 24 flags from the Caribbean. All of these happen to be part of the Afro diaspora spread throughout the world. And we, again, began the process of finding colors that were the most prominent and patterns in those color choices. So, for example, there are a lot of countries that use Pan-African colors, which are also reflected in the streams above us. However, these colors are often used by countries that are attempting to separate themselves from the colonial past. You also have countries that leverage blue, red, and white. And a lot of those countries that will leverage all three of those colors are usually countries that still have close ties to the colonial powers that oversaw those particular countries. So few African flags have blue prominently displayed in their color choices, and these are the countries that do, as opposed to the countries that did not. And additionally, we spent a lot of time talking about prominent fabrics, patterns, and tonal systems that are from different regions of the continent as well. That way they understood. These were the colors that were used in the country of the United States. These are the colors that are being used across the diaspora in terms of flag choices. These are the most popular and prominent fabric choices. That way, if there's a particular community, let's say Newark, New Jersey, which has a high population of Nigerian and Haitian Americans living there, they can now look at, okay, what are the prominent colors that are leveraged in Haiti? What are the prominent colors and fabrics that are from Nigeria? Maybe we actually leverage designs that actually better reflect these communities in this particular region versus attempting to do one thing for all Black people, sans all of the intersectional identity markers. So with that, I know I've mentioned a lot about intersectionality. Which goes into my point on positionality. So positionality are all of the intersections that make you who you are today at this moment right now, but that positionality will shift from one point to another, right? If you, as I mentioned, are someone who is undereducated, and we can say that children are undereducated, that positionality of that child in that moment isn't necessarily where they'll end up. Right? If you identify as someone who happens to be poor, that doesn't mean that you will always be poor. So there'll be aspects of your identity that shift over time, right? If you are a child and you are short because you are a child, you might grow into a short adult, or you may grow into someone who's average height or above average height. So certain aspects of your positionality will shift over time, but it's important to understand who you are in this instance, because your positionality also influences how you navigate design solutions, also influences the perspective that you have on the world, and also influences the blind spots that you have as an individual. So if you're designing without an account of those blind spots, you now repeat the cycle of designing things that could create harm for other people in the future. This behind me is what I call the positionality matrix. I'm gonna stand up for this for a quick second. But with the positionality matrix, these are all intersectionalities that make up who we are. They're things that you can add, things that you can take away. But a part of the exercise is attributing a common color to any of these that can't be attributed to a negative, right? So for race, you can't make the common color for race black, white, yellow, or any other color that's attributed to a person, because people may interpret that as a positive or a negative. So you choose a neutral color, then you go from there. When it comes to economic standing, you can't pick black or red, because being in the black or being in the red will have positive or negative attributions. So you pick something that is also neutral, right? Green is fine, because green is just a reflection of money. But once you have the color, you take a CMYK designation, which is just a color coding system for the colors, and then you divide those, that number by the number of options that you have. So let's say this blue, it's 100% cyan, right? Let's say for race, I have 100 options. I now divide that 7 times. And the numbers that I'm given are attributed to each of the choices, right? So if I'm black, and being black is the third choice, if I divide that number by 3, I now have a given hue. Oh, sorry. I now have a given hue for my category, which is why the colors beneath the main piece are different shades, because this was the exercise I did with my students, and they had to show me what their positionality was in comparison to everyone else. But what we do, I do this to kind of showcase the differences, but I have them add up the numerical designation for all of their choices, and then divide that by the number of number of intersections to come up with a common hue. And that becomes hue you are, dad joke. Right? So if you notice, like, there are people that have differing race, socioeconomic background, and religion, but because all of these other pieces are so similar, their final hue are more comparable than folks that share similar racial identities. So the thing that I say to people all the time is, just because someone else is black, or just because someone else shares the same gender identity as yourself, or is from the same socioeconomic background, it doesn't mean their other intersectionalities will actually place them in the same spot when navigating perspectives or navigating design solutions. So you have to understand the intersections of who you're designing for in order to come up with a solution that works best for them. And that is my presentation. The bar, yeah. Thank you, brother.
So I had a question, just about the positionality matrix, just so I'm understanding it. So, is it it's a gradient from in group to like further and further distance? So like in race, like the darkest cyan is what?
Let's just say 100.
100. Okay. So like if like let's say if we're talking about black, like both of your parents are black. Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Got it.
Or if you identify.
If you identify as black, capital B black, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the other thing I wanted to mention is when you gave the example about Thanksgiving dinner. You know, actually, I thought you were going a different way, a different direction with the observation, because you know, there is probably some aspect of like mixed settings that involve an intentional protection of what information is shared. So like, okay, if you're a newcomer to Thanksgiving dinner, it's possible that all that tea won't come out. Right? And I feel like that's probably one of the things that gets overlooked about these studies that are done by like in-group or people who are not insiders to the cultures, right? They could be misinterpreting things. What do you think about that? Like, are you exploring things like that as it relates to like how people like really embrace the recommendations that are like being explored in your research?
I think there are a number of things that I think I find fault with how design is practiced. I mean, the book itself falls into design criticisms. Like that's the main genre that it falls under. But I feel like there are a lot of things that are problematic. One, most design institutions only give you but so long to research or work on something. You might have 6 weeks. And that 6 weeks has to include your research, your solutions, and the presentation to the client. So you don't have much time to get to know. So you're moving really fast, and when you move really fast, I feel like I keep making a lot of like not recommendations, references to the current administration. When you follow like the Elon Musk belief of break fast and solution fast, the thing about it is the outgroupers are the ones that feel the pain the most when something breaks, and they're the last one to get recovery.
Yeah.
And I often tell folks, like, you can do it fast and cheap or good and slow. But fast and cheap is always, fast, cheap with maximized profits is the way that people go about it. And a lot of times what you'll find in research is people will ask questions that are assumptive with no way of validating it, right? Like, I can come to your family dinner for Thanksgiving. I can see that there's family drama, and I'm taking notes, and I can ask you questions, be like, man, this family messy, ain't it? And you'd be like, man, this family been messy since I've been born. And you're just like, messy since been born.
Yeah.
Who do you think is the messiest? Man, Uncle Joe the messiest. Like, Uncle Joe, messiest person. Where do you think Uncle Joe got it from? So like the entire time period, I'm asking you questions around assumptions that I have. And as you mentioned, there's family tea that I don't know about, that the person that I'm interviewing probably doesn't know about, but I'm building my perception on who this family is, what this housing structure is, based off of my introduction, and possibly not just to a family, but to a culture that I've never engaged before, right? I remember my first couple of years, and I grew up in New York, I grew up in the Bronx. I remember my first couple of years here in college, there were things I didn't understand, and I felt stupid about it after a while. But growing up in New York, if you were in a bad neighborhood, there were telltale signs that you grew up in a bad neighborhood, or that you were walking through a bad neighborhood that you would know if you grew up in New York. Coming to Cleveland, it was the opposite, right? So tall buildings, tall buildings, shattered glass, used condoms, crack vials, right? Oh, I'm in the hood. And the faint smell of urine. I'm in the hood. I'm in a bad neighborhood. Good neighborhood in New York. Front yard, backyard, right? Fence. I get to Cleveland and I'm like, oh, which is what I normally did until I had a car. I walk.
Just walk around.
Just walk around. I went to Cleveland Institute of Art for undergrad, so I'm walking. My walking takes me into East Cleveland. I'm looking around. I'm like, oh, this must be an amazing neighborhood.
It's
Like,
real
there's so
nice.
many
Yeah.
black-owned homes. Like, oh man, this is nice. I turned the corner. I watched somebody getting stomped out. I was like, no, no, assumed wrong. No, it's not.
Comes at you fast.
Yeah. Or what was another stupid assumption that I made? I can't think of the other ones that I made. The trunk as well. Yeah.
Is there like a what's the word I'm looking for? Is there like a, you have to consider all the perspectives and all the lived experiences in design. How much are you trying to hit? Like, is there like 80% of all the audiences, like for the bathroom example, right? Can you cater to everyone in one design? And if not, where is that barrier?
You can and you can't. So the thing that I often tell my students is that no design is perfect beyond the initial introduction of the problem. So I can create a solution for something that might be perfect for all of the people in the room, and it would have accounted for all of the demographics that are in the room, but the room might change, right? Let's say you ask me like, hey, Omari, I would like for you to perform a research project on the third space and this community so that we can figure out what we need to do to better engage this community. Which will be fine. I'm also researching the positionality of the community as it sits today, right? 2 months from me completing this project, if there's, it could be different. If there's an influx of new people that are moving here, if, let's say, a bomb goes off and Case Western Reserve University is destroyed for whatever reason, and so with the university circle, that might also change some of the insights that I've had. So I tell people consistently, like, your solution could design for everyone that's there if you take account of everyone that's there and the nuances of their experiences, but it doesn't mean that it's going to scale with all of the changes that will be had. And because of that, what you need is to understand that your solutions will never be, they shouldn't be stagnant. John went to Kent State, as I did. That's where we both got our master's degree from. And one of our professors would always say, your solutions should always be perpetual beta. Which, if you have an iPhone, you completely understand, because the phone itself is the hardware, but the software is continually updating for the users that are there. So if you think about the solutions that you were designing as something that will consistently need to evolve, as it evolves and you take into account new data points about new people that are there, you now end up in the situation where you're continuing to design equitably for larger societies, keeping it sustainable and limiting the liability for the organization that hired you to create whatever for them in the first place.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, what design examples do you have that have, tested time and?
Well, I think like for me, like cars are like the penultimate example of this. Some cars die. Like I would love a Dodge Viper, right? Like some cars die. Like you look at like the Porsche 911. It's been refined over time. The core experience is still the same, but who can drive the car today versus the inception of the 911 is very different. They have some commonalities, I'm sure, just from like a cost perspective, right? But it's very different, but the core experience stays the same. But at this point, the difference is like, they're not really solving problems anymore. We're just doing product design. We're just like, how can we tweak this a little bit so we can bring our profits up, maybe like however many millions of dollars Porsche has to worry about, right? But I think like, the barriers happen when there's like a natural end to a life cycle, when innovation changes or things go into a different direction, whether it's something that's happening in society, like we're kind of seeing that with AI, like when these bubbles begin to burst, even like with the space race or the arms race, AI is the new hot thing. But as those things cool off, like products die, experiences die, and they become new things and change as people do. So I think part of it is also understanding like, where we're at in society as humans that we're designing for or hopefully accounting for along the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's some case studies in the page that I use as examples.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. So, is this book your form of rebellion against the system? And what tools would you leave the group with to continue to fight the power?
Yeah. Yes and no. I don't necessarily like consider myself. So it's funny because before you walked in, I was having a conversation with Miss Jan and with Nate, and I was talking about like when people meet me, depending on the context in which they meet me, I get lumped into like a spectrum of like either Carlton Banks or Umar Johnson, right? Like that's the perspective that they see me as. And if they just meet me out and I'm just doing a public speaking event, it's not necessarily related to my work. It's like, oh, this is a really well-articulated brother. He's safe. But then when they like look at the work that I do, they're like, oh, this is a hotep. Not safe. And I'm not a hotep. I'm not Carlton Banks either. I'm not necessarily someone who like, I don't necessarily like walk around trying to figure out how to like upset the system or disrupt the system. I try to live my life without consideration of, right? So in my classes, what I do, because most design classes are filled with women, when we start talking about design artifacts that have been passed down through oppression, one of the things that we talk about in the classrooms are bras. And, you know, bras, corsets, high heels, and things of those nature, which were designed by men, have to blackness nowadays, I think about to write about what brings me contentment and what lessons do I want to share through the way smarter than me that have attempted to bring the system down and it hasn't worked. Could do that. Maybe it might inspire people in the future to continue conversations that may eventually do it. But I think in the meantime, because these are subjects that aren't necessarily being discussed, it has a place. So I'm just going to write.
So, like, based off the work that you're doing here, I don't anymore, but I do engage with students, activate or whatever, to be able
Now, and I'm also doing like small boot camps to like just album covers. I'm also fiction written by, because backtracking, in the beginning of the presentation I talked about how you can't interview someone about things that they don't necessarily think about because they might not necessarily have thought it through. Take books, like if we, how is their makeup done? If someone described a family gathering space where there are beads over these indicators of person, place, and thing, and you projects actually supported the culture that's being facilitated through folks. There are things that you can be in spaces and call out, and people would, like, if you say smell of burning hair on the stove, some folks would be like, Sunday morning right before church, you know, like there's certain or Saturday night before church. But like for certain people, you'll throw out an object, and people will begin to have feelings and thoughts associated with it. For the state of black design and not cause a fire. But I have like different sections of the lecture halls follow the smell of pink hair lotion. Like your mom putting lotion on you before you went outside, your sister, your auntie, somebody putting products in your hair to make sure that you were presentable. These two scents are attributed to like sharing in something to me. Like if I ever am in a space and I just wait for somebody to come over and be like, can I have some of that? But like when you begin to quantify, all right, this author who had this positionality, who wrote during this time period, around this story structure, all of them attributed these things to being beautiful. So they're like, okay, now how can we now design a space? So if you guys here said to me like, hey, we want to read you like of that time period, this is how they describe familial that to you, and then you guys are now able to take it and say, okay, this is how we're going to structure the space.
So many people write historical fiction. They aren't writing necessarily to reflect what's going on today with them. So they're going back and national. I talk to black women in my generation that they use our sulfur 8. You know, when you think about hair products, the pink lotion may not mean a thing to them.
Yeah.
So you do have to look at that generational. You use the term period.
Things will also be regional. I mean, be the scent. For us, I think my grandparents used Blue Magic for a little bit. But yeah, like I've not fully created a toolkit, but it's something that we're working with. I mean, I'm gonna see you in Texas. You're about to be a resident, so.
Yeah, I'll see you. How long are you here for?
I leave for Columbus tomorrow afternoon. I'm gonna be visiting Nate's class tomorrow morning, and then afterwards, I'm gonna.
When it started, where if you set out to write something for people who design, but
Yeah.
that was actually a question I had. Was like, who did you have in mind for this book as opposed to your first book? Are those the same people? But just curious, like how
Yes and
you were
no.
thinking about audience.
So the first book, I don't even necessarily consider it my book because it was more like a compilation,
yeah,
like mixtape. But the question of the first book was, what is Black design? And everyone wrote from their perspective of Black design. And my essay in the book was really criticism of advertisements of Black women. Because a lot of I'm not a woman nor am I queer, but a lot of my philosophical and research methodologies are influenced by feminist and queer perspectives. For no other reason than, not for no other reason, but primarily due to the fact that when you want to do something that impacts the greater society, you have to look at the people that are the most marginalized to understand how they survived and what they've gone through in order to assist. So like Bell Hooks, Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin, Angela Davis, perspectives on things and intersections that their identities touch on. The second book was more so me writing out my frustrations, and it was less about a specific audience and more about me putting all of my thoughts on paper. And just not being in a classroom and being like, all of this is bullshit. You know, like, would use, and it would, like, okay, this project that we're doing, we're gonna be talking about solutions for homeless people. And they're like, well, we're just gonna get some sleeping bags, we're gonna sleep outside. And I'm like, no, that's stupid. Get tired of being outside, you can get up and you can go inside. And then the feeling of desperation and hopelessness and all of these other things that people are going through, you lose. You're designing maternity wear. You're a man. How are you going to design maternity wear for a woman? Well, it's holding a watermelon to your stomach, but you don't necessarily have to give your body up for 9 months at a time period. You don't have a baby kicking and sitting on your bladder and all of these other things. So those nuances you lose. But when I would talk to the students, it would be like them through different things. And then it was like, I just need to put this on paper. And that's where the book kind of came from. Yeah. I didn't call them stupid. I
was curious also about, like, I've kind of encountered is that like authors that there's more now, but there's still not a lot of books that are trying to describe a future that is optimistic or hopeful, like science fiction that has like a happy ending or kind of describe.
I'm not limiting it to a subgenre of fiction. I want all of it.
All of it.
Because I feel like fiction for Blacks have been a way of like dealing with political subject without being too political. So like, but you couldn't write a direct book at that time period about those particular things. So you create like this fictional narrative. But you know the lines, reading the classes, like, all right, you guys, the book that we're reading is A Handmaid's Tale. If it's a class where the people aren't of color or primarily cisgendered, okay, the book that we're reading today is Parable and the Sower. And the notion themselves, and then consider those narratives as they live, and how many stories, indirect stories, if it's a dystopian future like hers today, that they're in.